So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar for our PY 2020 SAM Roundtable session. We thank you for joining us this afternoon and taking the time out of your Wednesday to do so. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and your technical support for today's session. So feel free to reach out to me via the chat if you have any questions or technology issues regarding today's session. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started with our presenters for today. You are on Zoom webinar, which is different from Zoom meetings, so you do not have the ability to unmute yourself. So we ask that you direct the questions or comments or concerns in the chat, or you can feel free to use the Q&A and we'll facilitate those towards the end of the session if there's time. And if we need to do a follow-up FAQ, we will do that. This session is being recorded, and the recording and the slide deck will be up on our website and Illinois WorkNet's website. Typically, the recording takes about 48 hours to get up on the website. The slide deck is up there now, and I have put the slide deck PDF in the chat. For those of you who joined us a little later, I will put that in the chat again here in a second momentarily for you. I'll also be putting a follow-up survey at the end of the session, and that follow-up survey will also be on your follow-up email tomorrow. So if you have a couple seconds out of your day today or tomorrow, we really appreciate that feedback for our professional development committee. And I know Mark Burgess and his team appreciates that feedback for the performance sessions that we do with him and his team. And then we also have live closed captioning on today for accessibility reasons or just your note-taking purposes. You should be able to save that live transcript towards the end of the session if you want to for this session. And I believe that's it. So Mark, if you want to move forward, I'll do our beginning polls that we do. So we started off our icebreakers with a superpower poll today, which I know was kind of fun to start the session. But now we're just going to do our standardized polls. So if you've ever joined us for a Workforce Wednesday webinar, you are very familiar with these, and we always appreciate you answering them just for our analytical purposes for the committee. So where's your local area? And some of you are already answering. It looks like we have quite a few people from Central Illinois joining us today. I'm also from Central Illinois, so welcome. And we have a good representation across the state filtering in here. We even have a couple people who are statewide, so that's awesome. Give everyone a couple more seconds to answer just where they're joining us from this afternoon. All right. I'm going to end that poll, share the results so everyone can kind of see. We do have a great representation across the state, so thank you for joining us, everyone. And our next question is, what is your role in the WIOA system? So if you are a local board member, chief elected official, a local board staff, a one-stop operator, if you are a Title I director, systems administrator, career planner, WIOA performance, another WIOA partner, or other WIOA stakeholder, excuse me. So we'll give everyone about a minute to answer this as well. Couple more seconds here. It's always good to poll our audience every session just to see what part of the system you're affiliated with. It's good for our presenters so they can direct the presentation specifically towards your needs. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end that and share the results. Looks like we have a lot of performance, WIOA performance, and Title I directors, career planners, etc. A good span across the roles in the system. So we appreciate you answering those polls. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mark Burgess, Performance Measures Manager, and he will start us off with the presentation.
Thanks, Kirsten. And again, thanks everyone for joining us today. This is, as we'd indicated a couple of weeks ago when we sent out notification about a couple roundtables that were held across the state last week. We indicated we'd have a follow-up to that to provide a summary, make sure we capture the discussions accurately, concisely, and overall caught everything that you had to share during those. We apologize for those folks that had a conflict and weren't able to join one of them. But we want to provide a summary of those discussions and then move towards what our next steps are. And so we've got Brian Richard and Andy Blank from Northern Illinois University Center for Governmental Studies, who have been doing much of the work around the statistical adjustment model for the last several months, or maybe even over a year now. They're going to speak to that model today, some of the items that they presented in the roundtables, some of the information we received, and then maybe a few items of recommendation or next steps. And then the second half of this will be more on the process and procedures. What can we do better? What can we do different to move forward? Before we move into that, just a couple points. We're not, wanting to spend time today on the actual measures themselves. While we know those are important to, overall performance outcomes, and they're the measures that we are utilizing the SAM to compare ourselves to as far as the adjustments. We have done quite a bit of training and technical assistance in that over the last several months. And so we want to try to stay away from those performance measures specific today. Also, we'll talk a little bit about the negotiations that are upcoming, but there'll be opportunities for technical assistance, outreach, and conversation in more detail on those as we get closer to our negotiation timeline. We'll touch on that just a little bit today, but not in too much detail. We really want to focus on what we found with the statistical adjustment model, what we heard from all of you, and again, what we need to do next. And then from that procedural point, want to move forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to Brian and Andy to present on the statistical adjustment model portion of this. We've got a poll first, if you can put that up real quickly, kind of get a sense where everyone's at in their understanding of the SAM, especially those that were able to attend via Phil. Phil, those were very helpful to you, helped you move up this scale of understanding the statistical adjustment model, how it's created, and its usefulness in the process.
That poll is up now. You have the ability to answer it. We'll give everyone a couple more seconds to do so. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that and share the results. Looks like most people were unable to attend a roundtable.
Okay, with that, I guess we'll have to preface that, we got to be cautious of time. And the intent today wasn't to have a third roundtable session virtually. So as we go over the summary, just keep in mind that we do have to keep that minimal, otherwise we won't have enough time. We spent 3 hours twice last week, and in an hour and a half webinar, we really can't recreate those conversations. So if you didn't get to attend, we certainly want your feedback, but we might be at a disadvantage, or you might be a little bit of a disadvantage having not been in those conversations. But again, we will have opportunities moving forward if you're available as our next steps to participate, get a little bit better understanding, and provide even more feedback. So again, I'll turn it over to Brian to start the conversation on the statistical adjustment model.
All right, thanks everyone, and not surprised by the poll results. Looks like we've made some progress, but we still have some work to do. This is, I know, a complex process, and so we're looking forward to further conversations about this. Today, we're just kind of going to give a high-level overview of the process, really with a focus looking forward on the next round of development of the model for the PY21 statistical adjustment model. Just a reminder, the reason we're here is because the law says we have to be here, that the WIOA requires this. There's a national model that adjusts state level performance targets, and the WIOA legislation requires that we do the same for local areas, and these efforts are going on in all of the states across the country, and we're learning from each other as we go. So go on to the next slide. So we have some goals, though, for our development of the local area statistical adjustment model. We want, to the extent it's possible, we want a simple model. We want the entire process to be transparent. We want the model to be fair, and also important is accuracy of the model. And Mark developed this little logo here, and I realized that we have an acronym. We want a FAST model. So that's kind of fun. So just, again, a broad overview of the model. What we're trying to do is to create a model that adjusts performance goals to account for changes in participant demographics and economic conditions. So, ideally, recognize that maybe you're serving more hard to serve populations. The economic conditions may have deteriorated, or on the other hand, if you're getting more easy to serve populations coming through the door, the model's going to adjust for that too. And what we're trying to do is quantify how those factors affect the levels of performance. And really the DOL guidance on this says what we're trying to do is to account for these factors that we really have very little control over. We don't have control over who's walking through the door. We don't have control over the overall economy, and make adjustments for those factors, and then hold you accountable for the factors that you're actually able to control, how you're providing services to the customers. And so the 2019 model really actually mirrored what the national model, the approach of the national model. They're using multiple linear regression, and that just means there's one outcome variable. So there's a separate model for employment rates. There's a separate model for median wages and all of the performance outcomes. And then we have the multiple predictor values that I just talked about, the participant characteristics, economic conditions. And we also include regional fixed effects to try to account for the differences among the local areas. For example, there's differences in outcomes based on whether you're in an urban area or a rural area. So some ways of trying to control for that within the model. Each variable, whether it's a participant characteristic or an economic characteristic, then a coefficient is calculated based on that statistical process. Some are positive, and those are expected to have positive impacts on outcomes, and the negative ones are expected to have lower outcomes. Something we talked about fairly extensively in the roundtables that I think needs a lot of explaining is that these coefficients there's just not a single person represented in a single coefficient. Each participant is reflected in a number of the different characteristics. You know, they have their demographic characters, they have their identified barriers and those things. So it's not accurate just to interpret an individual coefficient as being the sole factor for changes in outcomes. And we walked through an example, and you know, if there's those of you that weren't able to attend, we're happy to walk through that again at some point. But as Mark said, don't really have the time for it today. And then we use that statistical model to see how conditions and how the characteristics of your exiters changed from one year to the next, and how we would expect, based on the model, those to impact your overall outcome. So the adjustment factor for each outcome is just the sum of the effects of all those different characteristics and how they impact your overall outcomes. Go on to the next slide. So the PY20 SAM was created based on PY2019 data. We have to start this process in advance of having the outcomes for each program year. So we built the model using PY2019 data, again, participant characteristics, economic conditions, and then model those based on the actual outcomes, the employment and earnings outcomes of those participants. Then took the model and adjusted performance levels based on differences between participant characteristics between 19 and 20. We released those results, as you all know, a couple of months ago. And this whole process for us, for you, for DCEO, is all part of a learning process where we're seeing how this works in this first year and using what we've learned through this PY20 process in order to make a better model in future years. So, you know, we have really appreciated all the careful feedback, thoughtful feedback about this process, and we're working to incorporate that as we begin the development of the PY21 process. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, how some things that we are considering changing as we move forward. Just first of all, some basics. We're going to look at creating the next model using the combination of PY19 and PY20 data. For those of us that are data analysts, having more data almost always is a better thing. It makes it easier for us to make a good model. So we're going to look at this. If for some reason we find that maybe those 2 years aren't compatible, we may end up just using the PY20 data for the next model, but our starting point is going to be combining 19 and 20. Again, broadly speaking, same types of variables. And we'll go through the same process next year that we've gone through this year. So let's talk about some of the specifics of what we're looking for. Going on to the next slide. Again, we want a fast model. So as we start developing the PY2021 SAM, here's some things we're looking at to improve the simplicity of the model. We're likely going to reduce the number of variables used in the model. Our first attempt at this, we just used the same variable as a starting point, used the same variables that the national model had. Some of those variables don't make sense, I think, going forward. For example, we're going to remove variables that apply to a very small number of exiters throughout the state. An example is displaced homemakers. You know, there are a few variables in the PY20 model that less than 1%, they apply to less than 1% of exiters. So we're going to remove those variables just as one way of making it simpler. Also, the regional economic condition measures that we use. We use, the share of employment in various industry sectors. We will likely reduce the number of industry sectors that we're using. And our first thought is that we're going to focus on industry sectors that training is focused on. Training from the Title I participants is focused on. For example, we do a lot of training in healthcare, TDL, manufacturing. So we may just reduce it to the sectors where most of our exiters are expected to go into, so that it matches more closely the operations of the system. And then just one specific variable that we had in the PY20 model that clearly did not work very well was that raw number of exiters. That will not be in the next model. We know that. So areas we're looking at to make the process and the model more transparent. We're going to share, as long as the timing works out, our goal is to share the exiter files with each of you prior to the adjustment process. That way you have a chance to look at the data, make sure that what we have is accurately reflects the exiters that you, and then we can come in to an agreement that we have the right pool of exiters to base the adjustment process. And we're looking at ways we might be able to do this through IPATs as that's being built out. So, that is a work in progress. So if we can get that ready by the time we're ready to make adjustments, great. Otherwise, we'll do it kind of maybe on an individual basis. And something we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a few minutes. We want input from you as we go through the process of building the next process. Again, we want the data to be transparent. We want the process to be transparent as well. So we'd like input from a small number, maybe performance data experts from the local areas, as we go through this, so that everybody understands the process and everybody's comfortable with the process as we're going through. So let's move on to the next slide. So some ways we're looking at making the model more fair. Clearly Illinois is a state where there is very, very large differences in the economies from one region, from one local area to the next. And we want to try to do a better job of accounting for those differences within the model. The pandemic clearly had a big impact on the economy, and it was an inconsistent impact. It impacted some sectors. We also understand it impacted the operations of the system. So we want to look at ways of capturing those impacts and accounting for those impacts within the model. I touched on this before. We want a better variable selection for economic conditions, and we had this in the current model, but we want to make sure we're doing this in the best way possible. We're going to look at limits to the size of adjustments. Undoubtedly the model is going to produce adjustments that are just outside the realm of reasonableness. So we want to look at ways of limiting those situations, and so that the model doesn't have an oversized impact on your expected outcomes. And then finally, we want a model that's and a set of data that the model is based on to be as accurate as possible. So a lot of this is related to the transparency items that we're working on. If all of us understand the data we're using, we can ensure that it's more accurate. So we will be clear about the data we're using, the sources of those data, so that it's easy for you to understand what data were used, and easy for both of us to agree that the data are accurate, both on the front end and on the back end with the adjustment process. So again, providing opportunities for data validation just to make sure we are all in agreement that the data are accurate. All right, what's the next slide, I think? So some things that have come up through the process, ideas, I mean, these are not bad ideas. They're just not really feasible either for technical reasons or for, I guess, practicality or regulatory reasons. Somebody suggested that maybe we could build separate models for each local workforce area. That it's just not technically possible. And I also suspect that that would stray too far from DOL's approach, that they might not buy into that. It was also suggested maybe that each local area, we might interpret coefficients differently, based on local conditions. Again, that's not really feasible technically to do in any way that also is fair and transparent. But again, these are things that we want to build a model so that these are not really important considerations on the back end. That if we do build a FAST model using our acronym, these the concerns kind of related to these issues hopefully will be minimized. And I guess one other thing not on the slide, but that is not feasible. A common pushback, and this is nationally, it's not just Title I, we hear it from all the titles, is that it's just not fair that we have a target outcome that we're shooting for throughout the year, and then we get to the end of the year and the goalpost moves, essentially. That we might have cases where, yep, we met our performance target, but then the performance target was raised and now we're not meeting it. I do think maybe there's some validity to that, but there's nothing that me or Mark or even Julio can do about that because it is written into the legislation. And so I guess I don't mean to sound flip, but you almost need to call your congressman about that, because it's not something we can really address at the state level. Or even at the DOL level, I don't think, because again, it's in the legislation. So we're here to, make the best model we can, and because it's required by law, we're looking for your help in doing that. So.
Thanks, Brian. I think if you're done there, we'll throw up this poll. And Kirsten, if you want to go ahead and open up the phone lines for this first half here on the SAM, if anyone has some questions they want to raise, maybe they too difficult to type some of these things in. I will say that a lot of the questions that we received from the IWP performance work group, IWP in general, and from some of you individually in emails, we are putting together a question and answer document, a Q&A or FAQ. It's just difficult to present some responses on paper, and that's why we did the roundtables, as Brian alluded to earlier. Some of these things just aren't easily responded to in typewritten words. So we're going to do our best to continue to answer all of your questions, respond to your comments, and in fact, before we issue that Q&A, we're going to seek a few of your performance folks to help us review that and make sure the responses are clear as best we can. Some of those we won't even have responses to, because whether it be it's just not really up to the state of Illinois to make provide a response, and we'd have to go to DOL or something like that. We may just not be able to respond to some of those, but we are going to present a Q&A eventually. And a couple things Brian said, he mentioned the framework from DOL. We got to keep in mind there are some limits to what we can do But there is also some flexibility. So when we have these discussions, those last week, today, and as we move forward, we do want to see where we have flexibility, but we do know that we have to stay within a particular framework and within particular guidance regulations that we have been provided. So be aware of that. And then as you provide us input, please, if you're making a recommendation, try and provide us what the solution is, what the data is that would need to support it. We can't just put something in place because it sounds good, if you will. We really have to have some data, some information to support any changes, so that we can look at that flexibility and see if it's reasonable. DOL is going to be looking at that. They have told us we can have flexibility, but we have to explain it. We have to provide justification. So we really need, two parts to any comments, questions, recommendations, especially. And that second part is help us figure out if you've got a great recommendation, how we can fix it, if you will, or address it in some way. So again, I think Kirsten has opened up the line. I only saw one question. Maybe if you want to complete the poll here.
Yeah, I can
see how we did.
I can address Caroline's question. So in the roundtables last week, we talked about one or two variables that we may have found anomalies, that we question the accuracy. So we are looking into that issue, and if we do revise the PY20 data to make it more accurate, I think we can put together revised adjustment levels. Again, this is just for informational purposes to see how it goes, because at this point we're just trying to learn from the PY20 model. So I think I promised that at the roundtable last week, Caroline, and so we'll do our best to follow through with that.
Great, thanks, Brian. And again, if you want to speak up, I'm looking at the results. It looks great that we seem to have addressed at least 2 of your 5 major concerns, or at least those that are listed here in the poll. That middle one, hopefully Brian touched on that, and in future discussions can maybe help make that even more clear, why the variables will be selected. He mentioned we might change them, but the weightedness, there's a formula to that. So any changes made to that, Sam, I would, and correct me, Brian, but I would imagine the weights might change as well if you start taking things out. So
yes.
So that the response to that is not complete yet until we get back to work.
Yep.
Not hearing anyone speak up, I'm going to go ahead and move forward in the second half of this presentation. Really appreciate you helping us out through these polls. As you move forward, if you've got any questions specific to the SAM, here's Brian and Andy's contact information. I ask that you at least carbon copy me on that email so I see what's going their way, but if not, I'm sure they'll share it with me if you forget to put us on there. But we want to continue to work closely with them, and we can't thank the two of them enough for the amount of work, effort, time that they put into this SAM. We mentioned this several times in the roundtables. While we feel like we're way behind where we think we could be or should be, we're way ahead of 80% of the states, it seems like. So that's to their credit that they've put the amount of effort in here, and we're gonna make that product even better and continue that effort with all of your input. So keep us all connected, and we'll continue to review and research what you have going on, or what you think, especially as you hear more and more and you go back to your outcomes and maybe have some new questions you might have. So we'll move into the second part of this. In these first several slides, I'm really going to go over very briefly, because these we presented in the roundtables. They're just kind of background of why we have to do what we have to do. We all know there's guidance out there, minimally in the act itself, but through the training and employment guidance letters, there are any number of additional requirements that we have to comply with. Also, some of those are found in the final regulations when it gets to local assessment. So TGOL 1119 talks about the actual measures we're assessing that you'll see each year in those assessment outcomes that the statistical adjustment model adjusts up to or down, hopefully. 3 levels of performance that we talk about, expected, and this is kind of written from a state to a federal level, but if you just replace state with local, it's the same process that we implemented 2 years ago and will do again this year for the upcoming negotiation. So, you know, the expected levels are submitted. We do that through a unified plan. You do that through a form that we'll issue with future guidance. We negotiate goals, and as Brian said, you know, part of this process is those goals change, all based on what the statistical adjustment model says are appropriate adjustments. So that's within, again, the guidance. We can't change that. We can't just assess you on those negotiated levels alone, nor are we assessed on those. And then that last third component there is the adjustment based on those SAM outcomes. 4 factors need to be considered when we have those negotiations. We want to compare similar states. So you might want to compare similar LWIAs wherever you're located at. We'll give you data, point you to data that you can do that. We give you rankings. We did that last time. We'll do it again, so you can see where you're at with your similar state, similar local areas. The SAM is obviously a key component to this, and none of these have a particular weight. They're just all considerations that we'll take into account, that you should take into account as a negotiation team, review team leading up to those. We're always, I think this third one, I mentioned this in the roundtables, this third one really, in my mind, is key. You know, we could take away a lot of this guidance. We could take away a lot of the formality of everything. But the key of WIOA has always been continuous improvement. So how can we get better? If you're doing a great job, you're getting a high performance outcomes, that doesn't mean you can't do something else. Maybe you can improve on that outcome, but maybe you can still implement new policies, new guidance, new technical assistance to ensure your staff are as well informed as possible on all things WIOA. So there's many ways you can continuously improve, not directly related to a particular outcome. And then finally, for us, we have to ensure that we're helping DOL, Department of Labor, meet certain performance outcomes that are in the GPRA, GAPRA, I think is how they call that acronym out. And so you're trying to help the state meet its goals, and we've provided those in the past to you at the IWP meeting, and we'll continue to make sure those are available so you see what our goals are. Again, transparency, making sure you know where you fit into the puzzle of a state outcome. A technical employment notice was provided prior to assessments that said, here are the 2 measures we're going to be assessed on in PY20 and PY21. Going forward in PY22, we should expect that all 5 measures for all 3 of our Title I programs will be on the table for assessments. The main reason why we weren't able to do that, and DOL wasn't able to do that for states, was the data wasn't good, wasn't available, wasn't accurate, wasn't reliable. There are any number of words you could attach to the fact that we just didn't have the data we needed to assess the other 3 measures. And so we can't even recreate. Someone asked in those IWP submissions, could you see how those might have played out for the other 3? And unfortunately, it would be a false sense of information if we had done that, because it's just not good information at this time to put it in a kind of a blanket word. It just wasn't useful to do that. And so, you know, again, we're mimicking the federal model down to the states and on down to all of you. Here's the negotiations last time around, the outcomes this time around. You'll see in the middle there. And then you see our negotiations, how they went recently. We did those 3-4 weeks ago with DOL, so you can see those. We'll make those public. You've got them actually on this slide deck now. So that's kind of one of your starting points of discussions around negotiations is how each of you as an LWIA, as a board, can assist us at the state level meeting our goals. And then a final piece of kind of guidance is what we created for all of you in a notice. And I did not change this. This should actually be notice 20 NOT-01. So I'm not gonna mess around. It's changed now. So apologize. Someone caught that on us at the roundtable asking, oh, is there going to be new guidance? Well, there will be new guidance, but that wasn't the new guidance. It'll have a different number. But notice 20-NOT-01 kind of gave you the local landscape of how we were going to assess all of you. And key to that was this item down here, the whole harmless that we said we would do and implement. So we'll highlight there. And what that meant is there was really no sanctions. We'll talk about here in a minute. Maybe the showing up for your boards in red on your assessments, maybe having the word fail behind the red was kind of misleading to all of you, or at least some of you. And so we apologize for that. And one of the things we want to do better in the future is our messaging. But really there was no consequence. It was really, as Brian said, this is kind of a trial period during this pilot project where we're trying to figure this all out. We're trying to work with you, trying to, and we're going to do better moving forward in working with you. We recognize that as another area that we need to consider strongly. And so moving forward, we will revise this notice. We'll revise policy based on some of our discussions, some of your input, and how we need to move forward going into PY22 and 23, and also PY21 outcomes. So more to come. We understand if you have some questions and comments to that, we'll, again, we will entertain those and we'll have discussions and come to some final agreeable decisions on those. And then, here's kind of the landscape of that moving forward. You'll see down here, we have to negotiate on 2-year cycle. Our next upcoming negotiations are PY 2022 and 23. And they will occur in September. So, it's going to be a fast track to get to that point. And at this point, I don't know that we're going to make a lot of changes to what we did 2 years ago, but we certainly will have some discussions with all of you, or at least some of you in a work group, and come to agreement on any changes that seem to be better for the process overall. So as Brian did with the SAM, we heard from you. We've received your questions and answers, your comments. Continue to receive those in chat today or the Q&A, and we'll open up the phone lines here at the end, and we'll give some opportunity moving forward. But here are some of the things we heard that we really didn't have a response to yet, but you're concerned how ongoing partner site closures might affect your ability to do business. We know there's some state offices that are still closed and you're unable to get into your facilities, and that affects how you serve your participants. Even if you can serve them virtually, how does that affect the services you're giving and the quality potentially of the services? We know you're doing a great job with what you've been given. We just have to be mindful that it does affect overall service delivery and potentially performance. As WIOA, requires, we are supposed to be serving the hardest to serve with the multiple challenges or barriers to employment. And so how does that affect those outcomes? And that's something that can be looked at maybe through some data and other means. We need to, determine how that might affect your outcomes as well. You've asked for better engagement in the process, so we're going to hopefully give that to you, starting with the roundtables, starting with all of the technical assistance we provided, where we're opening up phone lines, we're taking your input through chat. We've got a small work group helping us develop the technical assistance so that we have a local set of input, individuals providing us some input, so that we're not just creating this at the state level and assuming we know what you need and want. So we want to continue doing that. And we need to identify how best to do that. We want to get a stronger understanding out there to you of these adjusted levels of performance. So every time we make a change, it might change these, and we want to make sure we're providing the information you need. It was brought up that with some of the schools closing, shortage of teachers, and maybe other reasons, it seems like there might be a reduction in training opportunities. So how is that potentially affecting some of the outcomes that are then adjusted? So we need to have some discussions on that. Funding cuts, how is that affecting, again, your ability to provide services that are needed? So we need further discussions on that. The trauma-informed one, we had a series of webinars. They might still be going on. I've not been able to participate in those. We had those created 3 or 4 sessions, I think. And how can that be addressed in a career planning kind of point of view? So we want to look at that. And trauma-informed, primarily we've been thinking, how has COVID affected all of us and how we do business and how we interact with our participants and customers and businesses. But that can be extended well beyond just career planning, but in the nature of performance, maybe that's what we're looking at, is making sure we have some discussions around that and how we can best address that. And then last, I mentioned already, is we need to recognize there is flexibility and what that is, while still ensuring that we're meeting the guidance and requirements of the acts that we're obligated to. And then we did get some recommendations, no decisions made yet. So these are just some things that will lead us in these future discussions. It was clear that some of the messaging, some of the language and terminology we've used has either confused, maybe been interpreted as contradictory, what have you. And so we want to make sure, again, we're getting clear messages out there, and we're going to bring some of you locally into our conversations when necessary before we send those messages out going forward. We were asked if we could create a simplified kind of overview of this whole process in a slide deck or a document that local boards can understand without going into so much depth that they maybe won't understand it because they don't have the ability or resources to be available to fully understand what all of you are committing yourselves to in your everyday roles in the local system. So we've started putting that together. We've got a couple volunteers. I'll be sending out by the end of the week a first draft of that, and make sure we get that finalized again with your input and get that out to the board, just to kind of give them a better overview of this entire process, including the SAM and the adjusted levels and outcomes. We were asked if we can do a better job of capturing barriers to employment, because currently all we can do is capture them of entry and enrollment. And unfortunately, that's how the guidance is laid out. That's how the PEARL, the layout, data layout that we submit to Department of Labor only capture them at entry and enrollment. So maybe moving forward, we can somehow figure out if there's some other ways to capture these and utilize them in some level or respect regarding performance. We can't change that. We can ask, but as Brian said earlier, there are just some things that probably are non-negotiable from DOL, and maybe DOL can't even change because the guidance is there, and they're just administering it to all of us states. And one of the things with that was around relationship building, that sometimes you don't know that a barrier or a challenge exists at entry and enrollment. And so, maybe there's something we can do to help gather that information at that early point. Maybe there's some best practices some of you have that some of you are able to gather a little bit more than others are through those. So we'll have conversation on those and share those. Special initiatives. One of the examples was if you have a special initiative where everyone seems to be exiting about the same time, it really skews the numbers potentially, because you have a large number in a given program year that is being assessed, a large increase from the prior year. So, we want to look at that and see if that's something that can be taken into account and how in future modeling and assessments. We were asked if we could extend the hold harmless clause beyond the program year 2020, and we certainly want to have that conversation. Again, with all of these recommendations, we want to make sure we have reasoning and justification to do it, and so be prepared when we have those conversations to kind of let us know what all the reasonings are. The more the better, I guess, when we present those. Paula and I, working with Laura, Lisa in policy, we have no problem presenting some of your requests, but if we don't have good reasoning behind it, it may not be acceptable to those that actually make final decisions on new policy and guidance. So we want to ensure we're getting that from all of you. Someone asked if we could have an appeal or petition process similar to the demand occupation training list, where you can ask to add new occupations by submitting additional data, revised data, updated data, employer attestations or letters confirming needs. And I think what Brian presented earlier about getting the data accurate before we submit assessments may kind of make that a moot point, but we can have that conversation and see, once those revisions are made, what that might look like, and if there's really a need after the fact of requesting. Maybe there's something that was overlooked in the assessment that we weren't able to account for, that we want to revisit, and you might ask for after you've seen those, or your boards ask for after they've seen them. And then we always want to make sure we're providing the technical assistance and guidance necessary to make sure everyone's clear. We can do that through many ways that all of you or many of you brought up in the roundtables, maybe some peer learning groups or some mentoring, and that's technical assistance locally, not necessarily the state giving to all of you, but things you can do at the local level, learn from each other and incorporate into your planning and process and policies. So we'll take those into consideration and have further discussions on those. And again, if you've got any questions, I got a couple more slides and we'll open up the phone lines. But if you got any questions, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll go through our last couple slides here. So how are we going to go about this? How are we going to ensure you're still part of the process and discussions? Ensure we're addressing things that need to be addressed in remodeling, if you will, or revisions to the model as we move forward, and also in process and planning. So the most talked about one in the roundtables is maybe some work groups where we sit down with all of you, or some of you, I should say. We need to keep them fairly small and discuss a couple high-level areas that we know we need, and we might have some others, but just the first kind of immediate needs are around the statistical adjustment model. So kind of the technical aspect of this entire package and process is in where we review the SAM, look at all those variables, see which ones through data seem reasonable, maybe to remove from the model, maybe to revise the adjustment the way it's accounted for in that. So that's going to be one that we want to get together. And then the other one be more procedural and planning in nature, might result in revised or new policy or procedures or guidance, notices, things of that nature. But what can we do, again, what can we discuss and recommend for consideration in that larger area of doing things a different way outside of the SAM itself? The SAM gets incorporated within that, but we'll let one group work on that, and while another group, and kind of how we've talked about this is that the first one would be led by Brian and Andy at Northern Illinois University, and the second one will be led by Paula Berry and myself. And I don't want to forget, although she wasn't on the initial slide of who's part of this kind of state team, but you all are familiar with Paula Berry, and she's a huge part of this, so she's going to be involved in that as well, and we'll have our policy people if they want to join in on the initial discussions, or wait for the recommendations to come from the work groups. Some other considerations, these bottom three large bullet points apply to both of those. So both the technical and the procedural work groups will have to keep in mind that there are some immediate needs. We have to get certain things done in a very short amount of time. One, to lead to decisions on whether it's working or not, the changes that are going to be recommended. I think, Caroline, to your point, you make changes, or you're going to look back at the model and see what the results might have looked like from those changes. But also going into those local negotiations coming up in September, and the process that will start well before September in planning and technical assistance. So there's some immediate needs. Some of these discussions need to happen sooner rather than later. But there are some that are long-term that, unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, we can't have all conversations in that short amount of time. Some of these things might have to be done over a larger number of conversations, testing, discussions, things of that nature. So some of these will be long-term. There's not an immediate need. While we want to get the PY21 model done to apply to the outcomes that are going to be soon over here. I guess tomorrow is the end of the program year. We'll submit the data and everything in September by October 1st, as we're obligated to. So we want to make sure we have a model for 21. Sometime after that, we'll have to wait for the state model to come out. But that's not immediate in the sense that we need that in the next couple of weeks. We'll have a couple kind of different time frames, whether that's the same work group continuing on or maybe a different work group. We'll have to decide in those work groups kind of the goals and time frames of what each will need to and want to handle. We do want these to remain small, maybe 5 or 6 of each of you to join us so that we can have some good discussions. You tend to have a lot of lengthier and time-consuming discussions when you have a larger number of individuals. We need people that are knowledgeable, ready to run with this, not somebody that is new, that needs to learn about performance or the process or things of that nature. And because of the kind of expedited nature of some of these discussions, we'll need people that are available. And we want to make sure we're representing the state appropriately and not getting everyone from a particular area, region of the state only. And Caroline, Tony, you weren't there, Tony, so I'm going to help throw you under the bus with Caroline. Correct me, but I thought maybe at the session you were at, you said maybe the IWP can be utilized to provide us maybe a list of those participants. So if that's correct, either confirm it in chat or go ahead and hop on the line here in a minute when Kirsten opens up okay, well, she said in chat. So that'll kind of make our jobs a little bit easier. We'll give you some specifics, a little bit more detail on the process, a little bit more detail on maybe our availability. I know Paul and I talked about this, and for that process and planning, we tend to have more availability on Wednesdays outside of webinars and Fridays. But the other days of the week, we seem to have more conflict. So we might give you a couple times on Wednesday and a couple on Friday. I know people don't like sitting in meetings, but again, the immediate needs shouldn't take too long, maybe 2 or 3 meetings at the most. And so, we can commit to that. And there's one of them I didn't put on here as I mentioned these work groups is we have a work group on technical assistance, and I talked to them last week, the ones that were able to join us, and we may put that on hiatus for a couple weeks. One, they're probably worn out after 6-7 months of developing technical assistance. We appreciate everything they've done, but we know it's a commitment and there's a lot of conflicts at times, and we understand that when they're unable to join, but they might want to join one of these other work groups. So we don't want to back them up into too many work groups at the same time. So we might put that group on hiatus, free those 5 individuals up to help with one of these other work groups. And so Caroline, you'll be able to, and Tony, you'll be able to have them on your list for consideration. And the work groups will have to decide what's best for them, best for meeting. I can envision, the technical and statistical adjustment model might need an in-person meeting again, just exactly the reason we didn't want virtual only roundtables some of the discussion, some of the explanation that Brian and Andy have to provide on the SAM was not really clear in past webinars, and so we wanted to get to all of you in person. So, you know, that's again up to the work group, up to Brian and Andy, whether they'll want to meet in person, partially, solely, or think they can do these next discussions virtually. The process and planning one, possibly we could do that virtually only, but I think that first meeting, maybe the first meeting will be a shorter meeting to set the goals, set the schedule, and set the kind of the framework of how the meetings will go moving forward. Get a deadline of when things need to be completed, decisions made. So that's still up in the air, and can be decided maybe again in one of the first meetings. And then finally, to that end, this is kind of going to dictate some of those immediate needs. We'll do the work groups here in July. Maybe it can bleed into August. I don't know. I think that's on the policy process or the procedural side, might be kind of pushing it to get policy out in August when you all need to start planning for negotiations, and we need to plan as well as provide technical assistance and guidance. So I'm thinking these probably need to be done in July, so we can get the next couple steps going with regard to policy guidance and technical assistance. You'll all need to submit expected levels. So again, that's a consideration in the timeline of these work groups and the efforts they're going to have and the results. We need to get everything out to all of you, the boards, and the negotiation teams in enough time to do all of your planning. And then we'll do the negotiations in September. So that again will give you a sense of unfortunately it needs to be expedited, but clarity on why we need to move forward in this fashion. And again, the key here is we want all of your input, and with only 5 or 6, there might be some discussions you'll want to have with your counterparts in other local areas that maybe aren't available or able to join a work group, get some of their input and bring those to the discussions. And our last poll, if you, Kirsten, can put this up before we open up the lines, or maybe open up the lines as you put this up, just kind of get a sense of how many people are available for any of these kind of commitments. 3 of them, the first ones here, are kind of pretty precise commitments. What do you think you might have available? The next one is kind of our performance work group. I keep asking them if they're willing to keep going on, and they keep going on. So I put this one on their behalf, at least from technical assistance. They're ready to commit to whatever we need, and they've been doing a great job making themselves available as we lead into all of our technical assistance up to and including last week's roundtables and even today, this webinar. And, you know, if you aren't available, that doesn't mean you don't have a say. You don't have an opportunity to still provide some input. We'll still take emails. As I mentioned, those individuals that are on the work groups can keep in contact with you and get your feedback and bring it to the table on your behalf. So you know, we don't want to shut anyone out of these conversations. Board members, you know, if those of you that are also board staff and you want to get some feedback from your board members, please bring that to the table if you're on these work groups. With that, Kirsten, if you want to, if you open up the phone lines. Anyone have any questions? I know that's a lot in a little over an hour, but it's really, I think, a pretty concise summary of what happened the last 2 weeks as far as information that was shared, although not quite as specific. The discussions we had with all of you, and we had anywhere from 12 to 15 or 17 people at each of those. So it was a nice, good mix of people that were able to show up, and then kind of set the tone for where we've got to go from here moving forward.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of say that our technical work group, we're not looking for people with statistics expertise. We're looking for people with performance data and performance outcome expertise. And operations, perhaps, also, so we can think about some of those issues.
All right, looking for folks. Did we? I hope the lack of silence means we did a good job of providing you what we intended to do today. And if there's anything left, please let us know. I'm not seeing any hands at this time. I'd hate to let you go early if you still have some outstanding questions or comments, something again that maybe after a week of attending a roundtable, you thought about it and you've got something new you'd like to bring to our attention now, or something, otherwise that you feel you'd like for us to know as we lead into these next steps of developing some work groups. Caroline or Tony, from your perspective, IWP, this seemed like, the plan, especially Caroline, that we set forth last week. And do you have any thoughts on how best, if we provide you, again, a summary of what each work group is and maybe our availability to get feedback from your folks on how you're going to get input on who wants to be part of either of the work groups?
Yeah, this is Caroline. I think that you hit it on the head. Once we get that summary and we kind of understand what the, what we're looking for from the work group, then Tony, I'm going to put him under the bus, we'll send something out to IWP, ask for the appropriate person from their area who has the time and the willingness to serve, to be sure that, every local region is represented and you get a good mix of people and opinions and eyes looking at it.
I guess, Tony, with your unfortunate incident this morning, you're hopefully you're not under the bus, you're in the bus, getting home later on today. Anyone else? Andy or Paula, from your recollection of the last two meetings of maybe any additional information we can share today, or again, anyone on the webinar today that has additional input or questions?
Not from Paula right now. Thanks though, everyone.
All right, well, Kirsten, I'll turn it back to you for final housekeeping. I don't know if you prepared a survey, but maybe we should send a survey out afterwards. Gauge, make sure how, as we always like to do, get some feedback on the webinar so we can continue to ensure we're providing information in a format that's best understood by all of you, and we can continue to build some good technical assistance, professional development for all of you. And I don't know if I thought I heard someone getting ready to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mark, that I did put the survey in the chat for everyone. It's our standardized survey, and that same survey will be in your follow-up email tomorrow, along with the website where you can find the recording. If you know somebody who needs to view this session, you can send them that website link and they can view the recording there. Typically, it takes about 48 hours for the recording to be up. Sometimes I'm quicker, depending on my workload. So be on the lookout for that, but you'll receive the link and that survey link as well in the follow-up email tomorrow. But if you want to take it right now, I know sometimes I like to take surveys right away after sessions while it's fresh in my head. That survey link is in the chat for you.
All right, with that, thank you all for joining us today. Caroline and Tony will be looking for information from us in the next couple of days on the work groups, and hopefully we can get those started maybe next week, find some people that are available and get these discussions moving forward. Everyone have a great day.